Welcome to the Voice of Counseling, presented by the American Counseling Association. This program is hosted by Dr. S. Kent Butler. This week's episode is how ACA is supporting school counseling through advocacy and features Guila Todd.
Welcome to the Voice of Counseling from the American Counseling Association. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler, and joining us today is ACA's Government Affairs Manager, Guila Todd. Guila has worked in Government Affairs and Public Policy Department of ACA for 10 years. During this time, Guila served on the board of Committee for Education Funding, whose mission is to provide a strong voice in support of increasing the federal investment in education. He is also a member of the Title IV Part A Coalition who advocates for increased funding for the establishment and retention of school counseling programs across the country. Welcome, Guila.
Thanks, Dr. Butler. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And I'm really impressed with the fact that you are a school counselor thought process, So let's start there. I was a middle school counselor before I got into becoming a counselor educator, and I enjoyed that realm. What led you into being a counselor or school counselor in that regards?
Well, one of the things about school counseling and mental health providers within schools is that, you have kids from all socioeconomic backgrounds, from all races. And, we have one common thing that we all kind of may or may not struggle with, especially being a teenager or a child, and that is coping with your environment. Some kids struggle with mental health, and you need that, not only your parents and your community, but you also need school counselors in your community to help you navigate those things, because it's tougher for some kids than others. So right. I like that. I like the fact that school counselors are there to supplement your family and your community with not only mental health services, guidance in your community, and things like that. So that's one of the things that attracted me to advocating for school counseling programs.
Excellent. And I think school counselors are really happy that you're doing that. So what's some of the things that ACA is doing with regards to school counselors? Because there are a lot of people who believe or fear that since we are no longer affiliated, so to speak, with American School Counselor Association, that we are leaving our school counselors behind. How do we change that narrative and let people know that we're just as focused on helping school counselors as we are any type of counseling discipline?
That's a good question. So just so everyone watching knows, we are still committed to supporting our members who are school counselors. That hasn't changed. As a matter of fact, ACA is, as you said earlier, is part of the Title IV Part A Coalition, which is one of the few coalitions who has a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? That has a lot of that's very vocal on the Hill.
Okay.
Pre-COVID, we were one of the top 5 advocacy groups on the Hill, and we have a lot of relationships with different congressional offices, advocating for not only mental health services in schools, but also for the well-rounded student. So some of the things we're doing at ACA is, in addition to being in that coalition, we're also doing our own advocacy as far as pushing legislation, Title IV legislation, as well as another piece of legislation that if you go to our Take Action page on the ACA website, you'll see that we're also pushing to supporting the Increasing Access to Mental Health in Schools Act, which is a tongue twister.
Yeah. What goes behind that? Can you talk about what that even entails? Because one of the things I want to hope to have a conversation with you about is there's so much that we're doing at ACA, especially on the Hill, to kind of put forth legislation or to support legislation. How do we get counselors to wrap their head around what that advocacy looks like, what your role is, what the role of ACA is in ensuring that the voice is heard on the Capitol?
Sure. Well, there are a couple of steps to that, right? So in addition to myself and members of my department advocating on behalf of counselors on Capitol Hill, we also ask that counselors advocate for themselves.
Right.
And that could be from anything from sending an email, going to a town hall meeting, coming to Washington, D.C. and meeting with your representative, or doing things in your own community. I remember when I was in undergrad, there was reading for the political science department called All Politics Are Local, which means, even when you vote for president, you want to figure out how it affects your community, right?
Right.
Whether it be your city, your local schools, your city council. So one of the main things you can do is try to run for city council. Try to join your school board. Anything that can affect your children in your community and provide those resources and bring those resources into your community. So there are myriad of things counselors can do.
So what typically has been the reason why people don't do it, though? I mean, what can we change the narrative on in terms of how people view those types of opportunities, so to speak?
One of the main reasons we hear a lot from membership is that people are intimidated or afraid to go to Capitol Hill, even have those meetings in your own state. And we try to persuade them to take those meetings and kind of draw the curtain back, so to speak, and just let them, it's a conversation you're having with a friend or a family member. There's no need to be intimidated, because guess what? That person needs your vote to stay in office. So,
right. So what are they intimidated about? Let's get to the beginning. What is it? Are they about their ability to have a knowledge base? Is it are they fearful, or they're just timid to kind of talk in public? What is it that typically stops someone, that makes them feel intimidated when it comes to coming to the table when it's necessary?
The primary reason is that they think that they don't have the knowledge base.
Okay.
And then we also tell them, listen, when you go to these meetings, they just want to hear your story.
Speak from the heart.
Yeah, speak from the heart. Be authentic. Tell them your experience with being a mental health provider in your community. Tell us some of the resources that you need. And we also tell them, ACA has your back. If you need any additional information, numbers, white papers, things like that, just send us an email, give us a phone call, and we'll do follow-up with the office from our end. Right. But other than that, just go in there and tell your story. It's not.
Go in and tell your story.
Yep.
So is there anything in ACA's wheelhouse that showcases how people could do that? I remember going to ILT and seeing people get up and kind of do a mock, portrayal of what it's like to go into a congressman's office or something like that. And I didn't mean congressman, congressperson office. I'm going to open this up a little bit. I don't want to sit here and genderize. But how does someone go into that particular office and do that? So what does ACA have at its disposal that helps people to kind of see that it's not as hard or not as bad as you might envision it to be?
Well, in addition to ILT, we also do Hill Day, which part of the Hill Day is a training component, which sometimes we role play, sometimes we talk you through it. And one component that we started doing about 2 or 3 years ago is bringing in actual Hill staffers from different congressional offices.
Right. And
they're providing you guys the knowledge to let you know, okay, here are the things we're looking for. Here are the things that you shouldn't do. Mm-hmm. This is appropriate to talk about in this meeting. Be prepared, come with your knowledge base, and always have a leave behind. And we also, on our website, if you go to the government affairs page, there's a whole section about do's and don'ts in congressional meetings.
Okay. So what's really interesting, sometimes you go in and you want to see your congressperson, right? You want to see your senator, or you want to see the person from the House of Representatives who is representing you and things along those lines. And you come across a staffer and you're depleted, right? You're gung ho. I'm going and I'm going to see this person. I've seen them on TV. I've seen them speak to this, and I just want to give them a piece of my mind, or I want to tell them something about what I'm coming to lobby about. And I get this staffer. How do you help people work through that?
Well, one of the things we tell people before they even get to the Hills is that, for instance, I want to see my congressman. I want to let him know what my problems are. Like you said, I want to give him peace of my mind. But one of the things people need to realize is that your congressman is doing work on the Hill. So even though you may call the office and his staff says, "Oh, Congressman XYZ will meet with you," anything can happen. He may have a vote on a floor vote or some other obligation. So 9 times out of 10, you're probably meeting with someone on his staff. And keep in mind, when you meet with the staffer, that staffer is probably more informed than your actual congressman about that actual piece of legislation, because they work with the same piece of legislation every day. So, and also, one other thing you need to realize is that, when you give that information to a staffer, especially if you're a constituent, they're obligated to take the information and brief the actual congressperson or the House person.
See, I'm glad you said person now. All right, cool. And so, but that's a real thing, though. But so you have to allow yourself grace to know that this person is going to bring forward some things. But it's not just going in that one time and saying something. There's some follow through. Can you talk about that as well? So you did say that ACA can take up the mantle and do some things with you or for you on your behalf. But what should the person do after they've had that initial meeting with the congressperson?
Yeah, so after that actual meeting, definitely follow up. You can send a quick email to the staffer, thanking them for taking the time to meet with you. Asking, sometimes in meetings, the staffer may say, thank you for coming in, but I need a little bit more information. So it's always good to follow up and with that additional information, because one thing I always tell people that go to these congressional meetings is that if you say you're going to do something, you need to actually do it. Right. Actually do it, because you're not only representing yourself, you're also representing ACA. So we ask that you follow up and provide any additional information that you need. Also, when you provide that additional information, just check in with us quickly so that we know, the information that you're providing is accurate and timely.
Okay, cool. So is there any current legislation that advocates for increased funding specific to school counseling programs that you're aware of?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the support for increasing access to Mental Health in Schools Act, as well as Title IV Part A,
right?
Which is a grant program through the Department of Education.
Mm-hmm. And so, tell us a little bit about what that is. What is that funding seeking to do? So
Title IV Part A is seeking to establish and maintain school counseling programs. Well, a portion of the grant program is to establish and maintain school counseling programs across the nation. There are three buckets in that program. One is safe and healthy students, one is effective use of technology, and one is well-rounded students. Mm-hmm. School counseling falls into safe and healthy students, which is, like I said before, is a school counseling component, but it also entails drug prevention, trauma-informed care training for staff, as well as social and emotional learning.
Okay. And so is that before the pandemic, or is that something that was picked up on since the pandemic?
Well, it was before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, it's more concentrated at this point, because you have to understand during the pandemic, because so many students were in and out of school or a hybrid learning environment. The Title IV Part A program is more focused on student trauma during COVID-19, as well as pandemic loss of education.
Okay. And so how does that impact students?
So when you think about the way students were during COVID-19, and that was an unexpected, no one saw that coming. So a lot of students were unable to cope with, number one, being at home all day, being away from their friends. Right. Some students were isolated, and you have to understand, some students going to school was their only way to receive meals. Right. So a lot of students have been experiencing trauma, not only during COVID, but post-COVID, trying to acclimate going back to a school setting every single day of the week.
Okay. And so we do this work and we need community involvement. and not just your typical principal and teacher and parent and student, and maybe counselor and all those other folks. Who else is part of this community that we're talking about? And how do we help to sustain school counseling programs? And why are these programs in the first place so important?
So like you said before, it's not only your principal, school counselor, and your teachers. It's also in a lot of communities, as well as in those under-resourced communities, there are community centers. And a lot of those partnership with your school districts to provide kids with additional resources, whether it be someone they can talk to outside of a school setting or their parents. And especially now during COVID, post-COVID, those resources are desperately needed. Like I said, especially in rural and under-resourced communities. Okay,
cool. So we talked a little bit about your role and how you got here. Let's talk about Guila.
Okay.
All right. So tell the ACA community, or tell the people who are watching this podcast, who you are. What is it about you that got you where you are today, and how you got established within ACA?
Yeah. So I'm originally from North Carolina. I came to Washington, I want to say 2001.
Okay.
Came to Washington in 2001, automatically started working for local government. Like they say, all politics is local. Right. Started working for local government. Then I moved on to the federal government. I worked for the Department of Justice for a number of years. And then I moved around to working in NIH. Prior to NIH, I came to ACA.
So what, as a young person, led you to want to be a counselor? Not a counselor, I'm sorry, to work within legislation. What got you so involved with, wanting to work with the government?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for calling me a young person. I'm
young to me.
Young-ish.
Young-ish. Young-ish.
So like I said, let me go back. So in high school, I was pretty involved in my community in North Carolina. I worked a little bit with the city council there, and then when I went to college, I majored in political science and public policy because I knew I wanted to do. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in politics, but I knew I wanted to do something in public policy, whether it was behind the scenes or an actual someone running for office. Okay. So after I graduated, I was like, no place better than the seat of government, Washington, D.C., right?
Right.
So I moved to D.C. Like I said, quickly got involved in local politics. And I think the reason that attracted me to public policy or government affairs, because I felt like you are involved with making a change, whether it be on the federal level or the local level. And all the hard work that went on behind the scenes sort of appealed to me because I knew that no matter what you were advocating for, a change was going to happen regardless. Does that make sense? Yes. Whether it be big or small. Right. And I felt like that was something that was really sort of appealing to me because, I had never been in a situation where I felt like, okay, I'm advocating for something. I'm going to Capitol Hill, I'm going to city council, and then an actual result can happen. I had never seen anything like that before I was involved in politics.
Wow. And so you took a behind the scenes type of job. Mm-hmm. What stops you or what's stopping you from perhaps running for office or being in that type of a leadership role? What's pulling you towards what you're doing? And is there any pull towards, being a part of all politics is local, being on the grand stage as perhaps a politician yourself?
I've known people that have run for office, and it takes a special kind of person to be on those sort of platforms.
Right.
Because once you put yourself on a national platform, local platform, whatever kind of office you're running for, you have to realize your life is an open book. And, you know, your family's life is an open book.
Right.
So I don't know if I would want to put my family through that. You know, I'm enjoying working behind the scenes, becoming a kingmaker, if you will, you know, and affecting policy from the ground up.
Right.
I don't know if I would want to put myself out there like that, but
wow, that's true. I think that's a really good point. I will tell you that I was watching a school board meeting yesterday. It was on the news, and it was very shocking that this woman got up there and she started talking about the fact that she rebuked people coming into her house and you know, with their petitions and, you know, yelling and screaming at her and her neighborhood and her neighbors, bringing guns, brandishing weapons, bullying, so to speak, you know, because she was on the school board, you know, to try to get their way. And it's really interesting. So the flip side of that is, would you want somebody to do that to you, but yet you think that you can go because this person is serving and do the types of things that in some cases are very despicable, right? Throwing things at people, threatening them, threatening their children, bullying them in some kind of way because you want them to possibly vote a certain way that you probably don't even have a whole lot of good understanding of in the first place. You know, and I'm not talking about folks who are out there petitioning, but I know a lot of people are bandwagon folks. And they think that they know what's going on, but they don't know the half of it. And then they go to a fellow human being and treat them like dirt.
mm-hmm.
That's you know, I hear you when you say, you know, I don't know that I want to bring my family into that because they don't deserve that because I'm standing up for the rights of all individuals, right?
Right.
Wow. So ACA is doing a lot when it comes to not just school counseling, but other aspects of it all. What other things do you have your hands in the mix of?
Ooh. So in addition to school counseling, we're also working with our college and career counselors. And I'm sure everyone knows, just because we send a lot of advocacy campaigns and email blasts regarding our Medicare reimbursement bill. We're also doing things on the state side as far as the interstate compact. And we're also doing grassroots, any grassroots training or advocacy help anyone would ever need. Let me think. Things with the Veterans Administration. Let me see, the list goes on and on.
So you guys are just busy. You got a whole lot. And how many people are in your staff?
So currently it's only 4 of us. We have a small team, but a mighty team.
So 4 of you are doing all those things you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot. So
listen, it's probably time for us to take a quick break and come back after the break to talk more about legislation with Guila. So if you all would, this is the voice of counseling, and come back with us after the break and we'll talk more about what ACA is doing.
Counselors help positively impact lives by providing support, wellness, treatment. We're working to change lives. We are creating a world where every person has access to the quality, professional counseling, and mental health services needed to thrive.
Welcome back. This is Kent Butler talking with Guila Todd about school counselors and what we're doing in our nation's capital to make sure that school counselors have what it takes to continue on in their jobs. So Guila, can we just kind of go back and reiterate a little bit about what the Title IV Part A is all about? What is it exactly? If you can give us the terms of it, and also, you know, why it's important to us as counselors and as those who are working in the schools to really acknowledge and be a part of.
Sure. So a little bit of history. So it started December 2015 by the Department of Education. It's a federal grant program. And the reason it was started because students were suffering.
Okay.
There was not a lot of access to mental health services in schools at the time. There still isn't, because the the ideal student to counselor ratio is 250 to 1.
Right.
In actuality, it's over 400 to 1.
Right.
And then in states like Arizona, it's actually 828 to 1, which is, to me, insane.
Right. And I would really want to endorse that it probably should be 125 to 1, because I don't think that anybody has that kind of time and access to students throughout the day to be able to work with them to make sure that they are healthy and that they are academically being able to find success and achieve. And so 250 is what the going rate is, right? But in all actuality, it needs to be, even in my mind, lower so that you can really have an impact on the lives of the students that you're working with.
Right. But believe it or not, some school districts have one school counselor for the district.
Yeah, for the whole district.
Right.
Jumping around from school to school.
From school to school.
Yeah. So how do we stop that? How does legislation stop that? And I guess in the real sense, how do we make those who are in Congress recognize the importance of what a school counselor brings to the table?
So going back to what we said earlier, our members who are school counselors definitely need to go to their leaders in Congress and tell their story. Mm. Because I think, I don't know about you, but I know when I was in high school, the idea of a school counselor is not what it is today.
No.
When I was in high school, our school counselor was cafeteria duty, bus duty, detention.
All the wrong things.
Exactly.
Yes.
Doing everything other than what they were hired
Nothing they were
to
trained to do.
Exactly.
Right. And then in my school, they had the insult of just being there to assign courses. And I've always said that, look, you can get a registrar for that. Mm-hmm. This person, and I was trained to work with folks, to help them. And then I get told, well, liability is in the way. And so we don't want you to do this or do that, because if you make the mistake of diagnosing this student with this or that, then we're liable to kind of do this or do that to make sure that the student stays successful. And I'm like, well, isn't that the end game anyway? Right? So let's do the right thing by our students. Why are we not pumping money into schools and education and counseling, but we can pump money into all these other things that are not necessarily helping our society grow and achieve?
Right, absolutely. And the thing is, the Title IV Part A program, it's been authorized for $1.6 billion through the end of this fiscal year.
Right.
The House has allocated $85 million additional dollars to funding, but the Senate still hasn't voted on any authorization or allocation for this bill. So we desperately need folks to go to Congress and say, listen, we need a lot more money so there's not a situation where we have one school counselor bouncing from school to school and they have over 800 students that they have to see. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. So you talked about there being a personal part of this where we bring our personal story to the table. But in all actuality, what have you seen work for these people who seem to be stone-hearted that work in Congress? How do you really get there? Because if I go to you and I bleed my heart out to you and I'm vulnerable before you, and then you're able to turn around and just dismiss me as if I was an ant that you stepped on, how do we get there? Because many of us are not equipped at tugging at someone's heartstrings to make them do the right thing. So what is it that it takes? Because on the outside looking in, it's like if somebody comes at them with more money or something along those lines, they're going to stay over there. But the person who's coming to them because they need their support and their help, the reason why they voted for them to be in office in the first place, and then they don't acknowledge that or they don't do anything about that. But then you see them running and doing all these other things that maybe somebody who is a little bit more affluent is putting in their way. How do you counteract that?
Well, I will say, in addition to telling your stories, hold these people accountable. You know, they're only here because you put them here.
Yes.
You know, and as easy as I put you here, I can take you away.
Well, that sounds like, not to use this person, but, I remember watching an episode of The Cosby Show where he says, look, I brought you into this world and I'll take you out, right? So, and I get that. Is that just seen as a threat that is really something that you can't really do anything about? I mean, you can maybe grassroots try to get people out of office. I mean, I've seen them do that. But is that something that they really take fear from when you say something like that?
I mean, that they actually do, because when constituents, because I'm getting paid to go to the Hill and advocate. They're tired of seeing my ugly face. They want to see people that have actually.
You're a very handsome man, so don't do that to yourself. Listen, it's about you got to pump it up. Self love, brother, self love. All right. Anyway, that aside, so they're tired of seeing you go up to the Hill because they know what you're bringing when you come.
Yeah, and they want to see people that can actually affect their jobs.
Okay.
Because believe it or not, when I call congressional office and say, I'm coming up here to advocate on behalf of the American Counseling Association, the first thing out of their mouth, are you a constituent? Are you coming with the constituent? So anytime I have a congressional meeting, one thing I do is see who's available in our membership from X, Y, and Z state and say, listen, we're having a meeting next week. Are you available to meet with me? I know you're a constituent of this person in Congress, and they want to hear from you.
Okay.
And I'm just there to supplement what you have to say. And additionally, a lot of times in state, especially because ACA has some states that are stronger than others. So in some states, ACA members have created their own outside of our efforts. They already had their own whole grassroots advocacy set up to where it's impressive.
Right. So I'm going to ask you a question that you might not be able to answer.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm going to put those who are in leadership on the spot.
Okay.
How do I, as president of American Counseling Association, and how does the governing council of the American Counseling Association do better? How do we get involved to be able to support this? Because we are the constituents, right? So what can we do in our role that will be more supportive of this process?
You something else, Ken. You trying to get me on the spot.
No. Let's just change that up. Hopefully, I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm putting on the spot those of us who are in leadership, who are professing to want to do these things the right way for our constituents or the people that we are serving, right?
Yeah. Well, one thing you all can do as leadership is that I feel like because leadership is asking ACA members to become heavily involved in advocacy, leadership should be doing the same. Now, whether it be
so don't do as I say, do as I do, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So, and I think if you're asking someone to advocate on behalf of their profession, you should be a advocacy leader in advocating for the profession. So you all should be the first ones on the Hill, stomping in your own community, sending emails, responding to voter voice campaigns. So that way you can say, listen, it's easy. It was easy for me. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So
we're almost like, to coin a phrase, we're like the first responders.
Correct.
Right. We're the first responders of how to lobby and how to go out and do the work that's necessary. So that's what people need to do and be able to see, right? And that's because maybe that's what I was asking you before was, what does ACA have in its wheelhouse? So we have these mock interviews and we have these mock going to the Hill type, video footage that we utilize, but we're not necessarily seeing in real day-to-day action people in leadership modeling for our counseling community how to go about doing this. And so when people are looking at this and saying, well, I'm fearful of going and I'm intimidated of doing this, then if they've seen those in leadership, those who they can touch, right? So they can touch those who are in governing council. They can touch those who are division presidents and chairs of regions and all those other places. They can touch those. Those are people who are I guess, people who they can relate to. But when they see those people doing something a little bit beyond something that they're asking them to do, then it becomes more palatable. It becomes more, it's an easier road to kind of toe, right?
Yeah, I agree with you, because I mean, it's a whole different situation than, Kent Butler seeing Guila Todd go, because Guila Todd has public policy experience, as opposed to Kent Butler seeing his colleague next door go.
Yeah.
Because he's more relatable. Does that make sense?
Right.
And that person can say, listen, again, if I can do it, you can do it. It didn't take much. I was apprehensive at first. Right. I got through it and it's totally fine. You should join me in my
because
journey.
Like, how a parent raises a child, right? As you see a kid that's fearful of doing something, you go and you do it with them, and you support them and you help them, and you encourage them to kind of go through that process. And so while each one teach one type of mentality and reaching back and bringing somebody along with you, we in leadership need to be doing that same exact thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And visibly.
Yes.
You said more than a word. I hope I didn't put you on the spot too much.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, so we talked about how we can be instrumental in making sure that the school counselor to student ratio is lowered, that funding is made available to ensure that students have academic success, that they're ready to go when it comes to being able to be, viable in the communities that they're going to be serving and living in.
But also, and I also want to note, we want to make sure funding is available for all communities.
All communities,
not just the school districts that are already thriving.
Right.
Because I think it's important that we note that there are a lot of under-resourced communities,
yes,
as well, and especially urban under-resourced communities, as well as rural communities, right, that are really suffering right now.
So can you talk about how those all connected? Because I think people don't realize that while people are saying, well, why are we trying to get funding for this particular place? They're not standing up on their own. We're the affluent ones, and we got it going on. So we should always get the kind of resources that are necessary. But how do we make people recognize that when one of us is hurting or bleeding, all of us are really hurting and bleeding?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Because even where I'm from in North Carolina, my school district was at the time one of the top school districts in the state.
Right.
But the reason for that is that a lot of the community leaders, parents, teachers, really fought for the community. Involved students, teachers, like I said, community leaders, and you may not get that in certain districts.
Right.
But the thing is, if one community is suffering from lack of community resources, lack of education, high crime, it will also eventually affect your community. I feel like we need to be cohesive when it comes to
Right. So I always used to say this, and maybe it's pie in the sky in some regards, but I used to always think that it's really important that we put resources into all of these different spaces for the right reasons. And I think that we need to take it out of local government, right? So many school districts, in my eyes, is, based on the type of taxes that are coming in or something. Maybe I got this wrong, but the taxes that come in and the things that come in from these different communities, right? Because what I used to always hear is like, well, why should my taxes pay for so-and-so's community? It should pay and stay right where I am. But those who are affluent and the taxes are paying for their school districts, and they're getting these beautiful schools, and they got great teachers, and they got all these resources. And then we have this other school that has the same design, so to speak, but they don't have the same type of tax flow. They don't have the same type of money that's being funneled into their schools to pay for resources, to pay for good teachers and all those other things. And so I always wondered why. But that's part of the scheme, right? That's part of the systemic racism that I think that's out there, that we have this system in place that keeps other schools at bay in denial of resources, while other schools are getting all these resources. And they're saying, well, it's the tax bracket. And then when you try to bus students to this school or this and that, it's like, oh, no, they can't come over here. It's like, well, aren't we trying to make sure that we have the best students in the world across the globe, no matter what district or no matter where they live? Then how come we're doing it from that perspective? How come we're not doing it from a more federal or national perspective so that all our schools are the same? We should be able to go into any school district and see the same resources across the board, but we tie it to people's taxes.
Well, one thing that ACA is advocating for, and which they've been advocating for years, is Title IX funding, which is to raise money for under-resourced communities. Because ACA, regardless of socioeconomic skin color, your demographic, all students should have the same access to mental health services in schools.
Right.
And all students should have the same level of education, no matter where you're from.
No matter where you're from.
So,
no matter where you're from. And I know that's really been something that I've been trying to harp on almost all my career, is that we need to change up the systemic systems that are in play that keep people disadvantaged. Those are the roadblocks, those are the stumbling blocks, those are the barriers that are in place that stop people from being able to move forward. I'm so sick of people saying to a person who is of color who gets out of a neighborhood that's been under-resourced and saying, oh, you're a good one. No, there are many good ones who just don't have the ability because of how we have structured how people should be educated.
Yeah,
there's nobody falling through the cracks, and there are no gaps. We want to believe that there are gaps, but there are no gaps. What's happening is there's lack of resources that will give people the opportunities to be able to show their greatness.
Because the thing is, if we all started at a level playing field, there would be
no gaps.
Exactly.
And so this whole myth about achievement gaps, right, that we're chasing, is really keeping us away from the message that needs to be played over and over and over again. And the type of action that needs to happen over and over again is that we need to make sure that these resources are for all across the board. Nobody should be lacking.
I agree.
We're going to do it, right?
Listen, as long as I'm working with ACA, I'm going to try.
That's all right. Well, Guila, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to share with our listening public, our Vodcast viewers, before we check out today?
Sure. I just want to tell everybody to, if you need any additional information on the ACA Government Affairs and Public Policy team, go to our website, Government Affairs, take action. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or anyone from our department.
Excellent. And just run down, who's in your department? Who is that for? Who are those four folks?
So myself, the chief, Brian Banks, Dania Lofton, who handles our grassroots, and Dominique Marcelik, who does all of our state advocacy work.
All doing great work on behalf of the American Counseling Association.
Appreciate it.
So thank you, Guila. Thank you for being a guest today. Thanks for talking about those sneakers. Thanks about all the stuff that we got a chance to talk about today. And thank you also for putting that challenge to me and my colleagues to be out there in the front and to show through visibility that we are doing this work. We're about it. And so I appreciate you. So keep me accountable as well. I'm more than willing to be that spokesperson that's necessary to be out there and hopefully showcase for our counseling community the work that we're doing. This is the Voice of Counseling. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler. I'm here with Guila Todd today from Government Relations here at ACA. The Vodcast is the Voice of Counseling and is really put forward by the American Counseling Association. So go forth, do the right thing, get out there in front of your Congress people, now, and so that we can get this job done in terms of helping all students. So thank you, Guila, and you all have a phenomenal rest of your day.
ACA provides these podcasts solely for informational and educational purposes. Opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the view of ACA. ACA is not responsible for the consequences of any decisions or actions taken in reliance upon or as a result of the information and resources provided in this program. This program is copyright 2021 by the American Counseling Association. All rights reserved.